Warning, this video contains full spoilers for Final Fantasy VII Remake and its ending. This isn't a review, but proceed with caution if you don't want to be spoiled of the ending. Thank you. As bizarre as this may sound, I've never actually beaten Final Fantasy VII. While I've been delving into the game on my loyal PlayStation Vita, I had to shout you out, little buddy, hang in there. I've only clocked in around 4 hours in total, all taking place in the slumbering city of Midgar. There is a reason I started playing the game out of nowhere, however: the remake. Yes, the constant barrage of trailers showcasing new characters, character moments, and the new combat system, it all looked so enticing like you wouldn't believe. I was sold at first sight. I needed this game. And so, the agonizing wait had begun. A long and painful 5 years since the game's initial reveal, all leading up to an incredible event that was the launch of the game. I was all ready to pick the game up until I realized, wait a second. I don't fucking have a PS4, and the game is exclusive to the console for a whole year! Fret not, however, as my friend who loves Final Fantasy VII to death will be able to tell me just how great this game is before I go ahead and buy an entire console for a single game. So Jeb, what did you think?
It sucks.
Wait, what? Jeb, no. Surely, it cannot be that bad. The game looks amazing. What made the experience so bad for you?
The ending.
Wait. The ending? You're telling me that the ending was so bad that it ruined the entire experience for you? What could possibly be so bad about that? Oh no.
Let us defy destiny together.
Well, you did this to me, game. I'm sure you're all happily and respectfully typing in the comments as to why I'm about to talk about a game I've never played before. Well, let me provide my reasoning. I'm a newcomer to the Final Fantasy series, having only played the hugely underrated Theatrhythm series. I've of course heard all the high praise of Final Fantasy VII and was stoked when the remake was announced. It was finally my chance to delve into the world of Final Fantasy VII, playing the game even closer to the original developers' intentions. It was going to be so much fun. I've only played the original game for around 4 hours. I have no pre-established connection or attachment to Final Fantasy VII, its worlds, or its characters, which is what has prompted me to make this little piece to begin with. I have no previous bias towards Final Fantasy VII in any capacity, so when I'm judging how this remake executes its ending and how that negatively affects not only the game, but the future of the 7 Remake series, I'm doing so as an outsider, not a fan. If this turns you off, then I'd recommend going to watch someone with extensive knowledge of Final Fantasy VII. But this is a video for people like me, who just wanted to bear witness to what Final Fantasy VII was all about, and subsequently cannot do that anymore with this remake. Okay, so I noticed a few things while editing this video that I just want to add. Firstly, the final trailer for the game did hint towards potential changes in the story, but there was no way in telling just how huge these changes might have been. Zack's return at the end of the trailer could have simply have been a flashback just like in the original game. Also, I need to put this in here before I get murdered. Not everything I talk about with the story is technically confirmed, but with the whole
Let us defy destiny together
line that Sephiroth says to Cloud, as well as the whole future events flash forwards the team experienced throughout the ending, I think it's heavily insinuated what I talk about with the story is in fact the case. If not, then the ending is even more convoluted and ridiculous than I initially thought. Either way, I still don't like it, but this is really just to save myself from the potential comments I may get. Anyways, on with the show. Since I've seemingly already started the discussion, one of the biggest bummers this ending sets up is a drastically different shift in story as compared to the original game. Before I discuss my concerns with the ending itself, it implies that nothing is going to be the same, or as the game states it, an unknown journey. What disappoints me about this the most is the fact that we're most definitely not going to be getting the original Final Fantasy VII experience as intended. This isn't just some minor change that will have some small implications on the story. It's a complete tonal shift and changes the story of Final Fantasy VII almost entirely. I imagine some of the original story scenarios will still be there, but in a completely different context and undermining the original intentions of the scenarios in question. This change alone defeats the entire point of the game being a remake. It's more so a reimagining or reboot of Final Fantasy VII, and for the people like me who wanted to experience the engrossing tale of the original game in a newer, higher fidelity format, we're fresh out of luck. Our only option now is to go back to the original game, which I'm sorry, is dated beyond belief. Blocky 3D models on top of low resolution, re-rendered backgrounds just does not look good anymore, with the backgrounds especially making it really hard to tell where you can physically go without using the immersion breaking indicator system the game has. Beyond my issue with the game's poor aging, I have no doubt in my mind that Final Fantasy VII is a groundbreaking title, but the point I'm trying to make here is that I shouldn't have to go back to an early and aged PS1 title to witness the full Final Fantasy VII experience when a new, fully updated version of it was being promised to us through the remake. Granted, the original game being easily available on all platforms makes the remake sting a tiny bit less, but nonetheless, if the original game is as incredible as people say it is, then imagine if the entire game got the remake treatment just as most of the Midgard portion of the remake did. How mind-blowing would that have been? But instead, we're probably never gonna get it. Not on Nomura's watch. Aw, you just don't like it because it's different. Isn't the whole truth here? True, the nature of it being different has affected my interest in the game, but it's where those differences lie that really seals the deal. It's simply too big of a change that twists the entire narration of the game on its head. Not something I would expect from a game being promoted as a remake. I don't know about you guys, but when I hear the word remake, I expect a somewhat faithful recreation of the original game, with updated mechanics and quality of life improvements to make the experience more accessible and polished for newcomers to get into. Isn't that half of the reason remakes are made to begin with? To give the games another chance? To put them back in the spotlight? And by God was Final Fantasy VII put back into the spotlight. A full barrage of trailers and promotional material signifying the return of this iconic game. This, my friends, is where yet another issue lies. The game's promotion. Changes were inevitable no matter what the scenario might have been. It would be silly not to expect some curveballs in there in some capacity. Changes like, oh shit, fast Zora swimming and Majora's Mask now has a meter? Or, I can die in Crash Bandicoot 1 and still collect the box gem? Sweet! Not, Sephiroth has seen his plans fail and is now planning on changing fate from the original game. Oh, and the mystical timeline goes adamant on stopping Cloud and Core from changing fate. Oh, and they must defy fate to save the world from darkness using the magical and untold power of friendship. Were these the changes people were expecting from Final Fantasy VII Remake? Hell, when the game was first revealed, it was stated to have been brought back due to popular demand. So my question is, was this ending demanded? Is this what all of these fans begging for a Final Fantasy VII Remake wanted? While I know there are many people who enjoyed the huge shift in story, I find it hard to believe that this is what most people envisioned when asking for the remake. Whether you're happy with the remake or not, I think it's fair to say that it wasn't what most people were expecting. So in that sense, is it wrong of them to be displeased with how the ending was executed, setting up future Final Fantasy VII Remake games that bear little resemblance to its source material? Something I believe people need to remember is that video games don't just appeal to the most hardcore of gamers. The trailers and advertisements for the remake were equally aimed for the general consumers who either aren't as into gaming as they once were, or older generations who might have played the original Final Fantasy VII back in the day that want to relive those nostalgic years of yore. Now, how do you suppose those people would react when they found out that the game not only wasn't the full experience of the original Final Fantasy VII, but that there would never be a definitive conclusion to the original game through the remake? Would it be unfair of those people to be disappointed that they just spent a full $60 on a game the trailer seemingly made out to be a remake of Final Fantasy VII, when in truth, it's only a third of a remake, with the ending that most likely nullifies any sort of future remake that follows the original game's structure. I'm not trying to downplay how much work and effort must have went into creating what's already there. Midgar looks incredible in the remake, more fleshed out than anything we've ever seen previously. But to call this package Final Fantasy VII Remake and only include a portion of the original game, doesn't that come across as a bit misleading to these consumers who wouldn't know any better? Some research of course would have helped clarify this to them, and in small defense to Square, they did state it in many interviews that the remake was being sold in multiple parts, but nowhere in the title or any of the promotional material was this ever indicated to be the case. What was stopping Square from simply titling this game Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1, or any other ambiguous subtitle? Well, it's time to get my tinfoil hat on, because I have a slightly cynical reasoning as to why this might have been the case. Everybody knew how big of a deal Final Fantasy VII Remake was. Square knew this too, and I'd put money on betting that they didn't want to miss out on that huge opportunity. So what did they do? Well, the only thing they thought they could: capitalize hard. And so it began. The game was revealed due to popular demand, and they state that calling it a remake was the right call from seeing the reaction from fans. Well, no shit guys, you just promised the people a remake of the fabled Final Fantasy VII. You know, one of the most well-known and beloved games of all time? What else did you expect? When I think Final Fantasy VII Remake, I think of all the other highly requested and mythical games that fans have been dwelling onto for years and years. Half-Life 3, Sonic Adventure 3, Banjo 3. Now imagine that instead of a true Banjo 3, we got a game that wasn't about collecting stuff to your heart's content, but instead was focused on managing and building your own car. Okay, bad example. Well, how about a Sonic Adventure 2 remake? I'm sure many people would be absolutely thrilled to see that, and I actually know what I'm talking about with this game, so let's just go with that. Okay, so imagine that this game, Sonic Adventure 2 Remake, looks utterly amazing, bringing Sonic into the next generation in style, perfectly capturing the original art direction and gameplay present in the original game. But there's a catch: you can only play the hero's story in this game. Of course, some of the levels are greatly expanded and there are extra missions sprinkled in there, but at its core, it's the same story and structure as the original Sonic Adventure 2. Oh, but there's a slight twist as well. Throughout the game, Sonic will occasionally be chased by bizarre, dark-looking Chal for reasons unknown. Alright, doesn't seem like that much of a big deal. I'm sure it's just some small side plot, right? Well, as you approach what you think is the end of the game, something strange happens. During the Sonic and Shadow fight, Sonic actually loses, in which Shadow promptly vanishes into a portal of light. The Dark Chao walk out of it, telling Sonic to proceed into this portal. These are the Chao of Fate, adamant on keeping the events of Sonic Adventure 2 intact, being the protectors of the timeline. We find out that Shadow has seen all of the events from the game, about Maria wanting him to protect the people of the planet, and that his goal wasn't revenge after all. He's seen everything about Gerald Robotnik and the Bio Lizard, and wants to get an early lead on these threats. Knowing that this will mean having to work together with Sonic, and not being able to take over the world for himself, Dr. Eggman promptly pops out of nowhere and kills Shadow. She's dead for good, and that's had a bad effect on the timeline. A flash of light disrupts everyone's visions, and suddenly, we're whisked off to a different scene. It's Mephiles from Sonic 06, and he's about to kill Sonic. Oh no! What? Wait, what's that? Elise kills Mephiles early and Sonic never dies? What the fuck? A light suddenly appears, with this version of Sonic being teleported away somewhere. The scene fades to black. Sonic falls to the ground, takes a few glances around him, and stands up as the camera pans out. It's City Escape, but in complete and utter ruins. What has happened? The camera moves up to the sky, and the text, "The unknown journey will continue," pops up before the credits roll. That sounds utterly ridiculous, right? They would never do anything like this in a million years, right? Well, here's the funny thing. This is almost exactly how it goes in the Final Fantasy VII Remake! Obviously, Sonic Adventure 2 isn't as mature as Final Fantasy, but this game still has a lot of darker undertones and isn't entirely devoid of serious themes. It's probably one of the most serious Sonic games out there, and we know the series has set up multiple timelines and dimensions in the past, so if Sega were to ever pull off something like this, it wouldn't exactly be new territory for them. Anyways, that's not the point. The point is, it's a game that proclaims itself as Sonic Adventure 2 Remake, remake, but it changes up things so massively at the end as to prompt any future games in that remake series as reimaginings, as there's no way in hell that a part 2 would be able to follow the exact story of Sonic Adventure 2, considering the story repercussions in part 1. Is this what the people clamoring for a Sonic Adventure 2 remake would have wanted? Because the way I see it, it's completely out of left field and turns the game into something it never was. All you really need to do is imagine your favorite game of all time and how you would envision a potential remake of it. If it was given a similar treatment as to what Final Fantasy VII Remake received, would you be satisfied with that? I think I speak for many people here when I say that I would not be happy with that. Not in the slightest. I'd honestly feel rather cheated, that I was being sold something that wasn't necessarily what they were promoting it as. Now imagine how many Final Fantasy VII fans must feel this way with the remake. Imagine how they must feel knowing that their dreams of a full remake of the game have pretty much been shattered. A game that was years and years in the making, looking more exciting than anything they could have possibly imagined. Not only does it make me upset that I won't be able to witness the world of Final Fantasy VII in a more appealing and bombastic manner, but the fact that the hardcore fans won't get one of their most treasured games fully remade in modern times is disappointing to say the least. But TWIP! You might be saying, Nomura stated in interviews that the game was going to have changes. While I don't doubt that at all, here's my stance on the matter. If I'm having to scour the internet to find interviews, many of which are translated from Japanese where the wording could have easily been lost in translation, do you really expect the general audience and consumers not in the know to find that? Right, so get this. It took me a bit of searching, but I found an interview from 2017 which came right from Nomura's mouth himself. And here, it states that it will be difficult because there is no more continuity between the compilation and the remake for the moment. Wait, hang on. In this interview from the Final Fantasy VII Remake Ultimania book, they state that it is in fact part of the compilation. The 5th game in fact. Not only this, but they act like it's always been a part of the compilation, when the other interview stated otherwise. So, if they can contradict themselves here with this very important information, then how am I meant to trust any of the interviews that may contradict one another? Hell, even in this same interview, Nomura states that the huge shift in story towards the end was the way he always wanted to do the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Whereas Kitase later on states that fans shouldn't expect huge changes in future installments. Which one is it? What should I expect? Nomura making big changes? Or Kitase telling us not to expect big changes? How am I meant to trust these interviews when all of the statements are contradictory to one another? Also, I really like how this interview was only revealed in this book once the game was already out and people had already bought and played it. No matter how clear this interview could have possibly been, it came out after the game. So it's hardly fair to use that as ammo towards the people saying that the developers never stated such huge changes like this would happen. Okay, so I can't realistically trust these interviews anymore when they all state different things. So what are my options? The way I see it, my only choice at this point is to judge the game from the trailers and promotional material provided by Square Enix themselves. To give them credit, on their official website they do indeed state that it's the first game in the project, but I don't know how many people would visit that who aren't really in the know of the game. It doesn't signify the huge changing story either, so there's still a huge issue at hand, but it at least tells people of the game being made up of multiple parts. The trailers, on the other hand, don't signify this in the slightest. While they do all take place in Midgar, not only are the scenes much more bombastic and epic in scale as to look drastically different between one another, but one could easily make the assumption that they're hiding away from spoiling anything outside of Midgar itself. Besides, Avengers Endgame did the same thing with its trailers, mostly only showing footage from the first 15 minutes of the movie, with any scenes outside of that time frame being heavily altered to not give away any significant plot details. This was of course done to prevent important plot details from being revealed early on, so it wouldn't be much of a stretch of this game doing the same thing. Even still, if someone sees one of the trailers for it, they're not exactly going to be thinking, oh, these scenes have only taken place in these areas that look kinda similar to one another. That must mean the entire remake is only the first third of the original game. For the general consumer, that's a big jump. Not one that I at least would make if I didn't know about the game. That's for sure. I know I've been clinging onto this Midgar thing for quite a while, but in all honesty, I don't have a problem with the idea in of itself. My main issue derives from the way it was promoted. There's no way that those outside of the gaming hemisphere could have known it was only the Midgar portion of the game, especially when the box art of the game is literally a recreation of the one from the original. Yeah, the shot takes place in Midgar, but it's also the same box art used for the entirety of the original Final Fantasy VII. So having that combined with the naming scheme of Final Fantasy VII Remake, at first glance, it's of course going to look like a full remake. This isn't even the main crux of this video itself, because in the end, I'm not against the game being Midgar only. I just believe they could have done a better job marketing the game and giving it a better title, as it feels incredibly misleading for those who don't know any better. If there's one thing I hate, it's dishonesty between the company and the consumer, especially when it's all for a profit gain. I'm not saying that Square were twiddling their mustaches and trying to come up with an evil scheme to trick the consumers, but I have no doubt in my mind that they know the gravity of calling their game Final Fantasy VII Remake, and that adding a subtitle such as Part 1 or The Beginning would have left to lesser sales, meaning they're somewhat, even unintentionally, misleading their consumers for monetary gain. And that's the part I just do not like in the slightest. This is amplified even further when coming across the game on social media, seeing articles upon articles stating how well the game updates the original, with no word of it being only Midgar until you click on the full link to start reading. Granted, if someone is interested in picking up the game, they are somewhat likely to read an article or a review, but I know that not everyone is like this, and they may just pick it up based on word of mouth or the huge headlines praising the game from ear to ear. A lot of this is all assumptions and hearsay, but I'm trying to put myself into the mind of someone not knowing much about the game at all, and in that regard, I firmly believe that them being misled on what the final product is has a decently high probability of happening. Look, all I'm really saying is if the consumer has to do somewhat extensive research on a game they want to purchase just to figure out what the game actually is, then I think there's a big communication problem between the company and said consumer. Especially when the game is being referred to as a remake, meaning it should be even easier to clarify what the game is to potential buyers, considering the implications of a remake being an updated version of a game that already exists. That should be really easy to market, but in this specific case, I'm just unhappy with how it was portrayed. I sincerely hope I've made my critiques with the marketing as clear as possible, because I don't want you thinking I'm out here to spite Square Enix for some reason. That simply isn't the case. With a game as important and beloved as Final Fantasy VII, I just want it to get the best treatment it can, and I don't think the game is entirely being done justice thus far. But again, I do think that the remake itself looks amazing from what I've seen and heard. Well, except for what the ending entails. Alright, it's finally time to talk specifics with the ending. Just what don't I like about it? Well, to bring up my undoubtedly brilliant Sonic Adventure 2 fanfiction from earlier, it was actually quite easy to shove in the general premise of the ending into the game, and that's exactly the issue with it for me. It's a plotline that could be inserted into almost any game. It's not unique to Final Fantasy VII in the slightest. In the simplest of terms, someone has seen the future that ultimately fails for them, and therefore wants to change it. In what context could that not be incorporated into any storyline? Or, Bowser has seen how his plans to capture Peach has failed, therefore, he's going to change the course of events to make sure his plans go into fruition this time. Oh shoot! Ganon has seen how he was defeated in the future, guess he needs to change events to make sure that doesn't happen. To me, this plotline feels far too cliche, and just not inventive, taking the spotlight away from the core principles of Final Fantasy VII's story, or at least what I've heard of it. Yes, I know I haven't beaten the game, but I at least have the knowledge in knowing that it wasn't about alternate timelines and changing the course of events through seeing the future. That's for sure. With this plotline, it means that while future events from Final Fantasy VII can happen, they're now given a whole different context that devalues their story purposes from the original game, which is why I think it's almost impossible for future installments in the remake project to stay true to the original game. Literally nothing is the same anymore. Well, unless they decide to pull a Rise of Skywalker and retcon everything The Last Jedi did. Or in this case, the remake. This will lead to major inconsistencies between what is, after all, one full project telling one huge narrative. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this inconsistency is something I believe we've seen from Final Fantasy before, so it'd be a shame to see something similar happen again. The only way the retcon would really work is if they cut the ending entirely and created a new one that closely followed the original game. This would then allow future installments to simply go back on track with the original game, without having to overcomplicate the retconning of many of the ending's aspects, such as Zack's possible return, or this entire future sightseeing nonsense. Another cliche I'm not a huge fan of is this whole defy your fate shtick. I'm not saying it's impossible to pull this plotline off, as it has been done well in the past, but it's the fact that the original game was never about this, and honestly, it comes across as putting these characters on a pedestal, rather than them simply being a ragtag team trying to save the planet on their own. Suddenly, it's all about their destiny, which I feel blends the game in too much with another Nomura-centric series. Final Fantasy VII Remake, with all of its convoluted timeline business and destiny-defined stakes, is becoming more and more like the Kingdom Hearts series, and I can't say I'm a fan of that change. After all, if I want a Kingdom Hearts, wouldn't I just, play Kingdom Hearts? I know you're all about to throw my original versus remake analogy at me, that I could just play the original game instead, and you're right. I totally can, and could get an amazing experience from it. But Kingdom Hearts isn't an early PS1 game. It's nowhere near as dated and spans multiple games, plus the fact that Final Fantasy VII Remake isn't Kingdom Hearts, or at least, it's not meant to be. I don't doubt Nomura's talents as a storyteller, but why did he have to inject his Kingdom Hearts fantasies into a game that's meant to pay homage? Nay, to downright be a recreation of Final Fantasy VII. For the people who aren't a fan of Kingdom Hearts' insanely complicated plotline, how do you think they'll feel about this remake potentially going for that same structure? Again, this goes back to the expectations of what a remake should be going for, the perceived notion of what a remake is. I've seen people toss out this dictionary definition of a remake, that it can indeed change things, even in big ways, but to that, I say, bullshit. I'm sorry, but let me give you my perspective on the whole ordeal. Are you all familiar with the term clickbait? When you hear that word, what's the first thing that pops to mind? Over-exaggeration? Misleading content? Red arrows and circles? Well, simply search the dictionary definition and you'll find that it actually means to make a certain web link look attractive, or in YouTube's case, making your thumbnails look pleasing to the eye. So in hindsight, if you make a thumbnail that looks good, you're therefore clickbaiting people. That's dumb, right? The most commonly perceived notion of clickbait is that it's misleading, right? Well, that's exactly how I feel with this remake definition shenanigan. While it technically is true that this game follows the dictionary definition, I believe the predefined notion of it absolutely doesn't follow along with what people would expect out of it. Disagree all you want with me, but I know there are people out there who believe the same thing, that when they think of a remake, they think of a game being remade, keeping its source material in the way games such as the Crash Bandicoot N. Sane Trilogy did. I can't possibly be alone in that, right? And as far as Nomura's statement on the remake having more than one definition in the context of this game, I just think that's dumb. How are general consumers going to get that? Gamers will, hardcore fans possibly will, but for the people who don't know anything about the game, how do you expect them to come to that conclusion? In my humble opinion, I don't think Nomura is in touch with those people wanting to experience the game for the first time, or those who want a faithful recreation of the game. Over time, I do believe more and more people will speak up about their concerns with this bizarre ending, and maybe then will Nomura begin to understand people's frustration with his new creative vision. In short, I've tried to discuss my problems with the remake's overall marketing, its ending, and how it betrays the legacy of the original Final Fantasy VII. I'm sure there's stuff I've missed or things I could have clarified further on, but this video is getting far too long, and as a non-Final Fantasy fan, I'd rather just play the games before discussing anything else further in detail. It's already taken me far too long to get this video out, but for those who stuck to the end, even if you disagree, I simply hope that you can see where me and other people are coming from with our concerns, and that you'll keep that in mind before you enter discussions on the game with others in the future. Well, that was fun. I'm sure of how humble and fair I was in that video, that people won't go after me, and I'll face no backlash for this video whatsoever. I trust that the people will respect me no matter what. I know it. I just know it.